The assumption of insanity is contrary to all logic and common sense. Attacks of delirium are not stopped by sprinkling with holy water or touching with particles of the Holy Cross. Such are the words of Father Erasmus Hoerner, a priest within the Vicariate of Natal, South Africa. He was attached to a Catholic mission dedicated to St. Michael, whose work included a school for native children. In 1906, he became involved in the case of a 16-year-old Christian Zulu girl who exhibited an awful abundance of diabolical symptoms. Horrific physical elongation of parts of her body, including the neck, instances of violent levitation, the ability to communicate in languages beyond her knowledge, superhuman strength, telepathy, speaking in a demonic voice, and much more. The story began in the summer when the girl Clara Germana Tele, or anglicised to Cele as per later accounts, confided in Father Erasmus that she had pledged her services to the forces of evil, that she had made a deal with the devil. By September, she was said to have been utterly consumed by demonic possession, with Father Erasmus and the other priests and sisters with whom he worked at the mission struggling to manage Germana's worsening and increasingly uncontrollable behaviour. There was only one solution. Writing to Dr. Henri Delalle, the Bishop of Natal, the rector of the mission requested the permission required for Father Erasmus to perform an exorcism. Before too long, however, a second girl succumbed to the demonic and what is said to have been bodily invasion by 7 demons, resulting in the case of Clara Germana Tele surviving to this day as one of the most sensational and chilling instances of demonic possession ever recorded. My name is Laura, and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. It was on the 5th of July 1906 that a 16-year-old Germana handed her confessor, Father Erasmus, a slip of paper that professed her satanic servitude. The reason for Germana making the diabolical pact is unclear, with Father Erasmus, in his contemporary report, citing a history of abuse and her parents, who practiced the indigenous Zulu religion, having cursed her as contributing factors. What is known, however, is that by 9:30 in the morning of the 13th of September that same year, Germana had undergone her first exorcism. Germana was, so the father wrote, raving and howling by the time he began the rite. In the days and weeks prior, she had demonstrated extreme violence towards him and others at the mission, including gnashing her teeth and tearing at her clothes. Holy objects, including saints' relics and holy water, repulsed her entirely. Her eyes, so the father wrote, pierced with rage, and she violently writhed, trying to hit and punch the sisters at the mission. When she was successful, the force of her blows was so strong that they deeply bruised the sisters' arms. Beyond this, the teenage girl's behaviour stretched into the impossible. Almost daily, it was written, the girl would levitate, floating to a height of 4 to 5 feet, sometimes lifting off the ground in spite of the sisters holding her down. And not only did the attempts of others to stop her levitating fail, they actually, on more than one occasion, resulted in those trying to pull her down being lifted also. Germana, in horrific fits of diabolical influence, would rise from the ground both horizontally and vertically, with even her clothes described as defying gravity. Impossibly, they would cling closely to her body, as if she existed in a bubble of unseen physics-repulsing energy. Her body was also said to have physically altered under the pressure of demonic attack. In a letter written about the case a year later by the Bishop of Natal, Germana's face was described as swelling up suddenly so that she could not even open her eyes. Other times, according to Father Erasmus, Germana would stretch, her neck appearing 2 and 3 times its normal length. At times, her arms and limbs would stretch amid cracking noises, as if they were about to break. It was horrific. A 16-year-old girl, tormented spiritually and physically by forces, so it seemed, that were beyond material understanding. And so, as the exorcism began in September 1906, Germana is said to have entered a preternatural rage similar to that which she had previously demonstrated. According to Father Erasmus, the sound she made was simply indescribable, like the roar and tumult of great armies battling in the air. At times, so the priest wrote, it seemed as if all these noises emanated from Germana. Then again, the uproar seemed to be in the church and in the air outside. Before too long, the priest had perspiration rolling down his face. Struggling to stop her from attacking those present, the father was forced to order that she be clapped in handcuffs and her arms and feet tied together. This, however, was no easy task. According to the priest, we succeeded only after 3 hours in finally handcuffing her. Her arms were stiff and almost unbendable, and she was continually being lifted up with her chair by the evil one, amid ear-deafening noises and pandemonium. At one point during the struggle, Germana, just as her right arm was being restrained, is said to have jerked loose from the 2 girls holding her, so as to attack a woman in attendance called Sister Anacleta. The sister was, so the priest's report described, grabbed by the throat with such an iron hold that she was nearly choked. All the while, the chair on which the demonically possessed young woman sat levitated once again, the result being that Sister Anacleta, still in the vice grip of the possessed woman, touched the floor only with the point of her shoes. A fast struggle ensued, with all hurrying to free the trapped sister and save her from being throttled to unconsciousness by Germana. The teenage girl finally restrained, Father Erasmus was able to continue the exorcism. He commanded the evil spirit possessing the girl to abandon his victim. When he reached the part of the ritual that commanded thou old serpent to conjure and make itself known, Germana is said to have screamed pitifully, before once again attacking Sister Anacleta, this time biting her on the arm. Once again, there was a struggle to free the sister from the raging young woman. According to the priest, there were, gruesomely, red, blue, and green marks corresponding to the 2 rows of teeth of Germana, but between them appeared a small red wound, such as is caused by a snake's bite or a needle. The following day, the strange wound had blistered and was leaking yellow fluid. The more the priest commanded the demon to depart, the more enraged the young woman is said to have become. She is claimed to have spoken in a voice that was not her own, bellowing, as Father Erasmus wrote, as Satan himself, with the sound being so awful that it pierced through marrow and bone. Again, the girl is said to have levitated in her chair, screaming like a wild animal, before the battle finally returning to the floor. There she is claimed to have writhed and twisted like one in the agony of death, before, in one final moment, stretching out her body to full length. Germana fell still. The exorcism was over, and she, at least for now, was free of the demon. As Father Erasmus wrote in his report, to make absolutely certain that she was free, we renewed the exorcism in the evening, but Germana remained calm, singing and praying heartedly with the rest. Then, a few months later, toward the end of January 1907, Germana stated that she would be possessed again. The demon, so it seemed, was announcing its return. This time, things were even worse. In addition to the violence, physical impossibilities, and frequent levitations, Germana now boasted unnatural knowledge of hidden things, events that would come to pass, and also secret information about others at the school and attached to St. Michael's mission. Not only that, a second Zulu girl called Monica also started exhibiting strange symptoms. The demonic possession was, so it seemed, spreading. In a dramatic and unusual turn of events, the Bishop of Natal, Dr. Henri Delalle, arrived at the mission, along with 2 priests. This was the 24th of April 1907, and he, concerned by what he considered to be hysteria at the mission, intended to put an end to the drama. As the bishop stated in a letter he wrote about the case a year later, I was very much annoyed and hardly believed it was a case of possession, but rather I put it down to hysterics. He had only reluctantly agreed to the first exorcism. Upon arriving at the mission, the bishop was irritated to discover a crowd had gathered in eager expectation of him delivering the two girls from the devil. And thus, as he wrote, "Unless I wanted to lose all prestige and authority in the native's mind, I turned to our Lord and told him the whole thing was now his affair and he had to help me." Despite his initial incredulity, by the time the bishop left, he was utterly convinced that Germana and the new girl Monica had been possessed by the devil. Aided by 5 priests, the bishop was engaged in the ceremony of exorcism from early morning until late at night. Violent as before, Germana is said to have resisted and indeed attempted to physically repel the efforts of the Catholic squadron. Teeth gnashing, biting, levitation. Monica, the other girl to be affected by unnatural behaviour, was likewise. According to the exorcist's report, she was possessed by 7 demons, which, by the conclusion of the exorcism, were forced to depart from her body. As for Germana, she is said, rather sensationally, to have understood every language in which she was addressed: Latin, Polish, German, French. Though she had studied none, and though she had never heard a syllable spoken in most of these foreign languages. As far as those present were concerned, this was because she was not herself. Her body, her tongue, were being controlled by some other entity. And not only could it comprehend multiple languages, the demonically possessed girl would even ridicule the priests in Latin, calling attention to mistakes and at times making fun of certain words, stressing them in a peculiar manner and singing them mischievously in an effort to disturb the work of the bishop and his team. It seemed to be that Germana, or rather the evil spirit controlling her, relished the attention and sought to disrupt and mock all that was holy. During a particularly dramatic struggle between the demoniac and the bishop, the demon was asked to give its name. According to the letter written by the bishop, Germana refused to say it. Further commandment, and she is described as saying, "I can't, but I'll spell it. D-I-O-A-R." When she was asked to reveal the name of her master, she once again protested, saying that she was unable. In the end, she spelled that too, writing the name letter by letter in the air with her finger. It was, so the bishop wrote, Lucifer. As hours passed and the heat of the exorcism grew, the controlling entity is said to have changed tactics. Understanding that the bishop and his priests would not leave until the entity departed, the terrible voice that came from Germana's mouth begged to be allowed to go into another girl at the mission called Anastasia. Eventually, the bishop called for a break. It was 9 in the evening. They had started the exorcism 7 hours before, at 2 o'clock. The next morning, the bishop, concerned for the safety of Anastasia, sent her away from the mission. Eerily, when he resumed the exorcism of Germana, she, again in an unnatural voice, is reported to have said, "You have sent away Anastasia. I can see her with another girl on their way to another mission, but I'll find her again." Given that she had been separated from the rest of the mission school, there was no way that she could have known this. In the end, the bishop and his priests were successful. Similar to the exorcism performed by Father Erasmus a few months earlier, Germana is said to have fell to the floor and moaned with awful pains at the conclusion of the rite. The sign of the cross, then there was a kind of convulsion, and she remained motionless as if dead. With the departure of the demon, the bishop wrote that the room was overwhelmed by a foul stench. After that, Germana was free, and stayed that way until 6 years later, on the 14th of March 1913, when she passed away at the tragic age of just 22, of what Father Erasmus described, a quick consumption. Undoubtedly, the case of Clara Germana Tele is difficult to comprehend, difficult to believe. It presents, through the written testimonies of both Father Erasmus and the Bishop of Natal, the entire diabolical cornucopia of behaviour associated with demonic possession, asking the reader to suspend material belief and accept the ability of a young woman, physically and spiritually surrendered to evil, to levitate, elongate her limbs and neck, and speak in voices and languages that were not her own. And yet, the case, as Father Erasmus informs us via his reports, was witnessed by many. The first round of possession and exorcism alone was observed by 3 priests, 3 brothers, 14 sisters, and more than 150 natives. By the time the Bishop of Natal became personally involved in the spring of 1907, that number had increased. Despite his initial incredulity, by the end of it, the bishop was entirely convinced that what he had witnessed and indeed helped to drive away was demonic. Concluding the letter he later wrote for a periodical in Rome, he stated, "If anyone can explain the signs, the symptoms, the words, and the cure otherwise than by possession, he will be more clever than I." Moreover, in the midst of the seemingly diabolical happenings, both he and Father Erasmus attempted to debunk the activity, with them both writing in their separate accounts of how they would try to catch Germana out by swapping holy water for ordinary water and concealing holy relics. As the father described, she always reacted when sprinkled with holy water, but only laughed when sprayed with ordinary water. We demonstrated this repeatedly. As for the levitation, there was, according to their reports, simply no explaining it. This, so Father Erasmus detailed, occurred frequently in the presence of many witnesses, including the bishop. And certainly, as impossible as it may sound, acts of demonically induced levitation are found in other cases, not merely those in close historical proximity to that of Germana, but far further back in time also. An especially chilling account comes from St. Jerome, the 4th century theologian. Echoing what was observed with Germana, he described demoniacs near the tombs of the prophets in Jerusalem. Women hung upside down in mid-air, yet their skirts did not fall down over their heads. Returning to Father Erasmus's report, Germana was said to have, on occasion, levitated in a horizontal line. Her dress clung closely to her body and limbs instead of hanging down in accordance with the law of gravity. And Germana's alleged levitation is not the only time that one can find similarities with other reports of demonic possession. Her so-called serpentine twistings, as if her entire body were of rubber, is similar to the contortions that Canon William H. Landrum described Heather Mitchelson exhibiting in 1992. The dramatic and bone-crunching elongation of the neck is reminiscent of reports from 17th century France and the so-called Devils of Loudun, when several nuns were said to have become demonically possessed, being seen to have bent their necks backwards in the throes of possession, as if they no longer had an intact spine. Even more grotesque was the behaviour said to have been exhibited by Gottliebin Dittus when she was supposedly assaulted by over 400 demons in the 1840s. As for the demonic voices and ability to comprehend otherwise unknown languages, one can point to the dramatic and tragic story of Anneliese Michel in the 1970s. Even the catching nature of the demonic possession bears similarities to the more recent case of alleged possession coming from Mexico's Girls Town, when, in 2006, a student at a Catholic mission boarding school made a Ouija board and became demonically possessed, with over 500 others ultimately affected by what was considered to be the diabolical. There truly is no shortage of cases that relate to the events described as having occurred to and around Clara Germana Tele in South Africa in the early 20th century, making this awful, abhorrent, and nightmare-inducing story quintessential, and above all, horrifically not exceptional in the realm of the dark and unseen.